Hello and welcome to teleSUR. I'm Jose Daniel Lopez in Quito, Ecuador, and this is from the south. We start in Peru, where thousands of people have marched on Saturday against presidential candidate Keiko Fujimori, the political successor of her father, former President Alberto Fujimori. Keiko, who served as First Lady during her father's mandate, faces accusation of laundering money she received for her 2011 and 2016 presidential campaigns. Fujimori has denied all charges but spent almost a year in prison while being under investigation and was only released before the elections. A prosecutor has requested 30 years in prison for the right-wing politician if found guilty. She will face off against the leftist candidate Pedro Castillo on June 6 round of elections.
Fujimori never again. That's why I come to march, for dignity, for my future, for the future of my children, for the future of other generations. That's why I come to march, because I feel outraged by so much corruption, by so many decades in which they robbed and looted us.
In Colombia, at least 2 people have been injured after 2 bomb attacks against police headquarters in the department of Cauca. Local authorities indicated that unidentified individuals threw an explosive object at a police station in the municipality of Miranda in the department of Cauca. The local government reported that the 2 injured were transferred to a healthcare facility in stable conditions. The executive branch of the department will initiate investigations to determine those responsible for the attack. The family of assassination victims have protested in the city of Cali to demand justice. The protesters demanded the Colombian police to respect human life and uphold people's rights.
My son went down to buy something for his child, and then he looked at a friend who was always there and got to help him. In the video, it's pretty clear that he was helping when the police started shot with the SMAT and they killed my son. But I asked for justice because he was a working boy. He was always working to be able to have money, so that my son would be killed that way it is not possible. I asked for justice.
Representatives of the Colombian National Strike Committee and the government have met to find a solution to the country's crisis. Both parties have expressed their commitment to a peaceful solution. Despite the good results from the meeting, representatives from the National Strike Committee announced plans for a nationwide demonstration scheduled for next week. Argentina has returned to a strict lockdown on Saturday to curb a new surge of COVID-19 cases. The measures will last from Saturday till May 30th and will limit circulation as well as canceling social, business, educational, religious and sporting activities. Only essential workers will be excluded from the measures. Earlier this week, the South American country exceeded its daily mark of coronavirus infections and deaths since the pandemic began, recording 35,543 new cases and 745 deaths. Meanwhile, the occupancy of beds in intensive care units exceeds 90% in many districts.
We have to adapt ourselves to this measure because COVID-19 cases were rising and it was worrying. If we are allowed to work somehow with the doors open but with customers staying outside, that helps us. That's much better than last year that we were not allowed to work in any way.
Costa Rica, one of the first countries in Latin America to start vaccinating against COVID-19, has suffered a surge in cases despite fast rates of vaccination. This crisis comes at a time when the government is carrying out a massive vaccination campaign with the 3rd highest percentage of immunized people in Latin America at 8.6% behind Chile and Uruguay. On May 20th, Costa Rica had imported 1.4 million vaccine doses from Pfizer and AstraZeneca, with whom it has a contract for 4.5 million doses, and is also negotiating with China's Sinopharm. Almost 4,000 people have died since the pandemic began, and the country has averaged 2,500 cases per day over the last 2 weeks.
The
increase has been considerable. Workloads have increased. The volume of patients coming in daily basis is absolutely significant compared to previous months. There are days when there are basically no beds available or there are no breathing devices available for the number of patients.
Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro has been fined for breaking COVID-19 public health rules. Brazilian authorities filed the case against Bolsonaro for promoting gatherings with no sanitary safeguards against COVID-19. Bolsonaro attended an event in Maranhão state on Friday without wearing a face mask and also blasted the state governor Flávio Dino during the event for imposing coronavirus restrictions. The Brazilian president's office has 15 days to appeal, after which the amount of the fine will be set. In Nepal, hospitals have run out of supplies as the country struggles to contain the second wave of the COVID-19 pandemic. The country's Ministry of Health has reported that most of the country's health facilities have been hit by a shortage of beds, bottled oxygen, and medical supplies, causing COVID-19 infected people to isolate at home in case of mild symptoms. Nepal is also running low on vaccines following an export ban on jabs introduced last month by India.
They told me that the oxygen level was low and asked me to manage a bed somewhere else because the hospital was packed. I tried many places and found one in the premises of this hospital. Only one bed was vacant. When we arrived here, we were quickly lucky to get this bed.
Meanwhile, in Hungary, the government has lifted several COVID-19 restrictions on Saturday as it announced that 5 million people had received at least one vaccine dose. Face masks will no longer be mandatory in public areas, an overnight curfew will be lifted, and restrictions on the opening hours of shops will be removed. Group sports will be permitted in public areas, as well as private events of up to 50 people. Open air events of up to 500 people will also be allowed. The easing of restrictions came as Hungary has vaccinated more than 55% of its population, the second highest rate in the European Union, using vaccines imported from Russia, China, as well as from the EU.
We have the 5 million Hungarian citizens vaccinated. We have been saying for months that we want to get back to our normal health lives. Vaccination is the only way to fight successfully against this virus. The goal has now been achieved. I thank all those who worked on this and those who got vaccinated. I urge those who have not yet got vaccinated to register. The coronavirus task force has decided that we don't have to wear masks in open area spaces or on the streets anymore. That means we can say goodbye to our masks.
Thai authorities have started a campaign to vaccinate inmates in the country's overcrowded prisons in Bangkok after registering a high rate of new COVID-19 infections. Thailand's Department of Correctional Services has reported that almost half of the inmates have tested positive for the coronavirus. Thai prisons are among the most overcrowded in the world, with more than 300,000 people detained. The Asian country is battling to contain a third wave of the COVID-19 and has recorded more than 100,000 new infections in less than 2 months. More news after the break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Thousands of Lebanese and Palestinians gathered in central Beirut on Saturday to celebrate the ceasefire in Gaza, seen by many as a victory for the Islamic group Hamas over Israel. The celebration took place in Martyrs Square, where people raised Palestinian and Lebanese flags, along with flags of a Lebanese Islamist group. There have been protests almost every day in Lebanon in support of the Palestinians since the violence escalated on May 10th. More than 400,000 Palestinian refugees are registered in Lebanon, according to the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees.
God willing, under the leadership of the resistance and the holy fighters, we will liberate Palestine and we will return. God willing, this is near by God. Today it is a small celebration to express that we have not forgotten our people in Gaza or the West Bank.
Our Al Mayarin collaborator in the Gaza Strip brings us more details following the end of the airstrikes by the Israeli regime.
Well, today is the first day of the ceasefire imposed by the resistance to the Israeli occupation. The population took to the street to explore the city after the destruction and to look for their belongings among the rubble and to visit the families of the martyrs and the wounded. An immense jubilation fills the chests of the Palestinians for winning this victory, achieved by the resistance, despite all the devastation and destruction and the human losses among the martyrs and the wounded. The people came out at dawn today with joy and happiness for the victory of the resistance against Israeli occupation. This occupation was trying to break the will of the Palestinian people, but what we see today on the ground reflects a different situation. What we have seen is a solid and steely Palestinian will that defies the Israeli occupation. Children and young people dressed in their own war-end and Ramadan holiday clothes, as it had coincided with the Israeli occupation fires, shelling and missiles. Children, men and women took to the street in a beautiful scene that indicates the deep confidence of their people in their resistance, thus giving an ultimatum to the Israeli occupation and threatening it, that if it violates the truce, it will also violate the truce, that is, it won't bomb the occupied area.
Hundreds of Senegalese people have taken to the streets to march in solidarity with Palestinians and to protest against Israel. The demonstrators marched in the capital Dakar, carrying Palestinian flags and banners with anti-Israel slogans condemning Israeli attacks on Gaza. The protests, organized by the Senegalese National Alliance for the Palestinian Cause, came currently with the announcement of a ceasefire by both parties. At least 250 people have been killed in Gaza and about 12 people in Israel after 11 days of rocket fire exchange between the Palestinian movement Hamas and the Israeli army.
The Muslim world has remained passive while they are being killed and subject to atrocities, even though they are believers. Today, no Senegalese should stay at home because all we have is due to the Prophet Muhammad, and those in whom we place our hope here below are placing their hope in Muhammad. So our hope is in him. So our Prophet remains the only constant, and that is what pushed me to come here.
Fishermen in Gaza returned to the sea a day after the Israeli-Hamas ceasefire took hold, but they said the area in which they can operate had been limited by Israel. The sea had been shut off to fishermen in the area since late last month, a measure Israel said it introduced after rockets were fired into its territory from Gaza. Dozens of fishermen gathered at the harbor on Saturday, fixing nets and getting to work on their small fishing boats. But they claimed the area they were allowed to operate in had been reduced.
The Israeli boat fired toward us at 3 nautical miles. We cannot come or go in deep. We stay close to the beach because we want to earn our living. We are afraid. A lot of fear. There is no ceasefire. They are shooting at fishermen.
Before the war, it was 15 nautical miles. Today, we were surprised that after the ceasefire, they were only letting us go as far as 3 nautical miles. What can we do with this? It does nothing for us. For a fisherman, it is a day by day. If you go on expedition, you may eat. If you don't, there's no food.
Gaza residents whose houses were destroyed by Israeli airstrikes have demanded their homes to be rebuilt. Gaza Strip residents say they want Israel to rebuild their homes as soon as possible, as they were left homeless after 11 days of bombardment by Israeli forces. Palestinian authorities have started distributing tents and mattresses in the Gaza Strip. The fighting between Israeli forces and Hamas left more than 200 people dead in Palestine and killed about 12 people in Israel.
We demand that the person responsible for destroying the houses, which is Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, he needs to rebuild them. We are civilians, and it is not our fault. The International Criminal Court should tell him, you destroyed these houses, so you have to rebuild them. It is his responsibility to rebuild them, because we are civilians. A civilian needs to be protected by the United Nations.
Libya and Tunisia have signed an agreement aimed at facilitating commercial trade and the movement of citizens between the two nations. The cooperation agreement was signed in Tripoli during the Tunisian Prime Minister Hichem Mishishi's 2-day state visit to Libya. The PM met with his Libyan counterpart, Abdulhamid Dbeibah, and the two leaders pledged to relaunch ties between the two neighboring countries. The Tunisian head of state was accompanied by several government ministers and business leaders who are expected to take part in a joint economic forum in Tripoli.
We signed today an agreement with several clauses, which aim to facilitate commercial trade and the movement of citizens between the two countries.
We have expressed to our Libyan brothers our complete readiness to stand alongside of them during the rebuilding of their country.
More news in a minute. Join us again after this. Welcome back. Benin's President Patrice Talon has been sworn in for a second term. Talon was re-elected in mid-April with more than 86% of the vote in the first round of the presidential election. The re-elected president has pledged to free all political activists arrested during electoral campaign time. Several opposition representatives were detained before or just after the vote in the West African state.
Devant Dieu.
Before God, the ancestors, and the Benin people, I, Patrice Talon, President of the Republic, elected according with the laws of the Republic, I swear to respect and defend the Constitution of the Benin people, who have freely given themselves to loyal to fulfill high functions that the nation has entrusted to us, to be guided by the general interest and the respect of human rights, to devote all strength to the search for and promotion of common good, peace and national unity.
Hundreds of residents have been evacuated of their homes after a volcano eruption on Mount Nyiragongo in Congo's eastern city of Goma. The city's power supply has been interrupted and hundreds of people have fled to the nearby border with Rwanda. Last time Nyiragongo erupted was on January 2002, killing more than 100 people and covering almost all the eastern part of Goma with lava. Goma region lies along the Rwanda and Uganda border and has 6 volcanoes, all higher than 3,000 meters.
It seems that the volcano is erupting, and the people of Goma are very worried because it is an unusual situation, and everyone is agitated and mobilized. Everyone is outside to see what is going on.
In Spain, authorities have announced that all vaccinated travelers will be allowed to visit the country from June 7th as the European nation aims to revive its tourism industry.
Travelers will only have to scan their QR code on a radar and they will no longer have to wait at checkpoints. So will facilitate mobility, which is the ultimate goal.
I think we are able to recover the gross domestic product that we have before the appearance of COVID-19, just 3 years since the beginning of the crisis. This is very important because it took us 8 years to recover from the financial crisis of 2008. 3 years compared to 8 years. I believe that it also proof of the response capacity that the European Union has had to face this economy, social and health calamity that we are going through.
Italian political parties and citizen groups have marched through the streets of Rome to demand changes in global health care. It came as G20 leaders got together for a virtual summit to work on a plan for health issues in the post-COVID-19 era. While Italian Prime Minister Mario Draghi and EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen hosted the conference together in Rome to discuss vaccine distribution, patent sharing, and pandemic preparedness, organizers said they were calling for a radical transformation of health policy to stop the commercialization of health.
We are demonstrating today in Rome to tell the European Union, to Ursula von der Leyen, and also the Italian government that vaccine must be free from patents. We must administer vaccines to all the people on the planet and not in the interest of multinational companies. Ursula von der Leyen is already bound by a motion voted by the European Parliament, and yet the European Commission is still defending Big Pharma. So we are here protesting against a G20 that not only does not stand up for the Palestinian people, but does not stand up for the health of all humanity.
Scores of people rallied in Ukraine on Saturday in support of the transgender LGBT community. Crowds gathered in the capital Kiev, waving flags and chanting as they call on the government to change legislation they see as discriminatory. In 2019, the World Health Organization accepted new measures which gave greater rights to those wishing to change their gender register at birth and no longer class the decision as a mental, health, or behavioral disorder. The Ukraine Health Ministry has not accepted these measures yet. People wishing to change gender in Ukraine currently have to pass a psychiatric exam. Some activists opposing the march also attended and were separated by lines of police.
Trans March is a march of transgender and non-binary people who are fighting for their rights not to be discriminated against in Ukraine and their right to be normal, not some kind of sick.
In order to have the right to change gender in documents, we have to make a psychiatric examination. On an international level, this change happened already, but we don't know when it will happen in Ukraine.
The last remains of the late Congolese independence hero Patrice Lumumbas are said to be repatriated home from Belgium. His remains are to be returned to the Democratic Republic of Congo 60 years after he was assassinated and dissolved in acid by the country's former colonial power, Belgium. Lumumba is known to have been killed on January 17th by the separatists and Belgian mercenaries in the province of Katanga during the chaos that followed the territory's 1960 Declaration of Independence.
A ceremony for the retains of the remains. It's a relief. You know, 60 years is a long time, and we arrive at this situation after years of struggling.
We are not asking for an apology. We are asking for justice. We ask that justice be done. We ask, like any family of a murder victim, that justice be done, that the investigation be carried out, that the culprits be punished, and that there be reparation. That is all we ask.
And with this story, we came to the end of this news brief. You can find this and many other stories, as always, in our website at telesurenglish.net. And don't forget to join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Jose Daniel Lopez. Thank you for watching.